We're restructuring to better leverage our core competencies. Your position has been made redundant. It's not personal, Mark. It's just business. The words came from Arthur Caldwell, the CEO, but the smug satisfaction radiated from the man sitting next to him. Tristan Vance. 35 years old, a recent MBA, and a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked like a mannequin that had been taught to smirk. My name is Mark Bennett. I'm 58 years old, and for 34 years, 1 month, and 12 days, I was the lead systems architect at Aerodyne Industries. I built the digital skeleton that held that company together. The termination meeting was held in the glass-walled conference room on the executive floor, a space I'd been in maybe 5 times in 3 decades. It smelled of expensive leather and air freshener that was supposed to imitate the scent of success. Caldwell slid a thin folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside was a severance offer that was an insult wrapped in legalese. A check for $38,250, so 1 month's pay for every decade of service, and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. Tristan leaned forward, his cufflinks catching the light. As part of our forward-thinking pivot, he began, his voice smooth, and practiced, we're launching a new initiative, Project Chimera. It's a complete paradigm shift in dynamic system management, a truly disruptive technology that will secure our next-generation defense contracts. He gestured to a sleek presentation on the large screen behind him. It was filled with animations and graphics that looked impressive if you didn't know what you were looking at. I knew what I was looking at. Project Chimera was my work. It was the modular redundancy protocol I had been developing in my own time, on my own hardware, for the last 7 years. The diagrams on the screen weren't just similar to my designs. They were my designs, copied from a proposal I had submitted 6 months earlier, and which had been rejected as unnecessarily complex. They had just given it a stupid, marketable name. Tristan was presenting my soul back to me, claiming he had invented it over a weekend strategy session fueled by cold brew and synergy. Caldwell cleared his throat. Tristan's innovation here is key to the new billion-dollar Aegis contract. We needed a fresh perspective. I looked from the screen to Tristan's self-satisfied face, then to Caldwell's practiced corporate neutrality. They saw a man in a slightly worn blazer, with calluses on his fingers and schematics in his head instead of buzzwords. They saw a relic, an asset to be liquidated. They thought firing me was the end. They were wrong. They didn't see the signatures on file with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. They didn't know about the conversations with my lawyer 2 years prior. They had no idea that the foundation of their billion-dollar contract wasn't built on company property. It was built on mine. Specifically, it was built on U.S. Patent Number 10-845,713, officially titled A Method for Dynamic System Reconfiguration and Predictive Failure Analysis, filed by one Mark Bennett. My signature was already dry. If you appreciate stories where quiet competence puts loud arrogance squarely in its place, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that substance still matters more than style. 2 days before the humiliation. I was in the server farm, the one I had designed back in '02. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and clean electricity, a smell I found more comforting than any corner office. I was running a diagnostic on the legacy Titan 7 satellite guidance system. It was my baby. I wrote the first lines of its code in 1994 on a machine with less processing power than a modern wristwatch. That code was now responsible for guiding over $12 billion worth of military and commercial hardware in orbit. It was clunky, archaic by today's standards, but it was flawless. It had never failed. Not once. Because I knew its every secret, its every quirk. There was an undocumented patch for a memory leak that only I knew how to implement every 8,000 hours of runtime. It wasn't in any manual. It was in my head. That was the kind of value they couldn't quantify in a spreadsheet. That same evening, Tristan Vance had scheduled a mandatory ideation session for the engineering department. He stood at the front of the room in front of a whiteboard, scribbling words like synergy, disruption, and blue sky thinking. He talked for an hour without saying anything of substance. He wanted us to ideate a solution for the very problem my modular redundancy protocol already solved. I had tried to explain it to him weeks before. He had cut me off, saying my approach was too granular and not holistic. He didn't understand it, so he dismissed it. That was his method. If it took more than a 5-minute PowerPoint slide to explain, it wasn't worth his time. My life's work was woven into the fabric of Aerodyne. 34 years. I started there when I was 24, fresh out of the Army with a knack for electronics. I remember the day I met my wife, Susan. I had just gotten off a 16-hour shift trying to debug a guidance controller for a drone prototype. I was covered in grease, and she was a temp in accounting. I missed my son's 5th birthday because I was in a secure facility in Nevada, integrating a new communications package. I have a box of VHS tapes filled with moments I wasn't there for. School plays, soccer games, birthday parties. I justified it because I was building something. I was building a future for my family, and I was building the technological backbone of a company I believed in. The stock options I had accumulated were supposed to be our retirement, our security. I calculated their value just last year, $1,172,800. A lifetime of sacrifice converted into a number on a page, a number that was now, effectively, hostage. The company I joined wasn't the company that fired me. It used to be run by engineers. Men like Frank Kowalski, my first boss and mentor. Frank understood that the company's real assets weren't the buildings or the contracts. They were the accumulated knowledge in the heads of the people who worked there. Caldwell's father had been one of those men. But Arthur Caldwell was different. He was a finance guy. He saw the company as a collection of assets on a balance sheet. To him, I was a depreciating asset with a high salary. Tristan was a new, shiny investment. Back in 2013, Frank was retiring. He took me out for a beer at a dive bar near the old plant. He was worried about the direction the company was heading under young Caldwell. "They don't value loyalty anymore, Mark," he said, swirling the foam in his glass. "They value assets. Make sure your name is on your assets." He told me about the concept of filing for patents as an individual. The company would still have what's called a shop right, the right to use my invention without paying royalties because I developed it while employed by them. But that right was implicit, and, more importantly, it was non-transferable and would evaporate the second my employment was terminated. "If they ever show you the door," Frank had said, his voice low and serious, "that IP walks out with you. It's your insurance policy. Use your own money, your own time, your own lawyer. Keep it clean." That conversation changed everything. I had been working on the foundational ideas for my modular redundancy protocol on my own time anyway. It was a passion project, a more elegant solution to a problem that had bugged me for years. So I did exactly what Frank said. I hired a patent attorney, paid the $15,000 in filing and legal fees out of my own savings, and kept the documentation in a fireproof safe in my basement. Over the next 7 years, I filed 2 more related patents, building on the core idea. The first was U.S. Patent 10,845,213, a method for dynamic system reconfiguration and predictive failure analysis. This was the heart of it, a system that could not only swap out a failing component with a redundant one, but could also predict the failure before it happened based on subtle performance degradation. The second was U.S. Patent 11,210,988, an algorithm for asynchronous data prioritization in degraded networks. This was the brain. It ensured that in a crisis, the most critical data packets got through, even if the overall system was crippled. It was the difference between a satellite going quiet and it sending one last vital piece of telemetry. The third was U.S. Patent 9,987,654, a self-healing hardware abstraction layer for legacy systems. This was the magic. It allowed my new advanced system to interface with and control older hardware, like the Titan 7. It made the entire network backward compatible and infinitely scalable. Together, they formed a trifecta of innovation that Tristan had slapped a new label on and called Project Chimera. He was trying to sell my insurance policy back to the company that had just canceled my plan. The day after they fired me, I didn't get angry. It wasn't rage. It was a decision. I went home, walked past Susan, who was waiting with a worried look on her face, and went straight down to my workshop in the basement. I opened the heavy door of the fireproof safe. The scent of old paper and metal filled the small space. I pulled out a thick binder labeled Intellectual Property, the original patent certificates, the correspondence with the lawyers, the time-stamped engineering notebooks with my handwritten notes and diagrams. It was all there. A complete, unbroken chain of ownership. For the next 48 hours, I worked. I didn't yell or break things. I compiled evidence. I created a meticulous, cross-referenced dossier. On one side of the table, I laid out the official patent documents, with their specific claims and technical descriptions highlighted in yellow. On the other side, I placed a copy of the Project Chimera proposal, which a sympathetic colleague had anonymously emailed me. It was the version being submitted to the Department of Defense for the Aegis contract. I went through it line by line. The core architecture of Chimera, described in Section 3, Paragraph A of their proposal, was a direct lift from the 17 formal claims of my 713 patent. The language was sanitized with corporate jargon, but the methodology was identical. My diagram of a neural network predictive analysis module was Tristan's AI-driven preemptive failure matrix. Same thing, different name. The data handling protocol detailed in their Appendix B was a textbook implementation of my 988 patent. They used the exact sorting and prioritization logic I had outlined in my notebooks back in 2016. They even used the same sample datasets I had created for my initial simulations. It was sloppy, arrogant plagiarism. The most damning piece of evidence was in their integration plan. They boasted about Chimera's seamless backward compatibility with the existing Titan 7 network. That was my 654 patent. There was no other way to achieve that functionality. My design was the only key that fit that specific lock, because I had built both the lock and the key. The arrogance was breathtaking. They hadn't even bothered to understand the technology enough to disguise their theft. Tristan had simply taken my rejected proposal, given it a new cover sheet, and sold it as his own genius. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, my experience for obsolescence. That was their fatal error. While I was compiling my dossier, the predictable chaos began to unfold at Aerodyne. On Wednesday, 3 days after I was fired, I got a call from Dave, a junior engineer I had mentored. His voice was strained. "Mark, it's the Omnicorp uplink," he said, the sound of alarms faintly beeping in the background. "The data buffer on Server 7 is overflowing. It's not clearing. We've tried everything in the manual. Nothing's working." I knew the problem instantly. It was the 8,000-hour memory leak in the Titan 7 legacy code. The undocumented quirk. The system needed the manual purge sequence I had designed, a sequence that existed only in my notes and my memory. "What's Tristan saying?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "He formed a rapid response tiger team," Dave said, the sarcasm thick in his voice. "We've been in 3 meetings. He's drawing flowcharts. The system is still failing." I told Dave I couldn't help him. I no longer worked there. I advised him to document every action taken and every instruction given by management. He understood. An hour later, I saw the news alert. Aerodyne's stock dipped by 2%. The headline read, Aerodyne Industries experiences service interruptions on key satellite network. The Omnicorp maintenance contract was worth $50 million a year, a small amount for Aerodyne, but a significant indicator of instability. The wolves on Wall Street would smell blood. By Friday, their problem had cascaded. The buffer overflow had caused a cascade of timing errors, corrupting the telemetry data for 3 commercial satellites. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but it was a visible, expensive, and embarrassing one. The company had to issue a press release blaming unforeseen legacy system complications. I knew the truth. It wasn't unforeseen. It was unremembered because they had fired the company's memory. This unfolding chaos served a critical purpose. It was a real-time demonstration of my value. While Tristan was busy with his buzzwords and team-building exercises, the very systems he claimed to be revolutionizing were crumbling because of his ignorance. He was trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation he didn't understand, and the cracks were already showing. My absence was creating a vacuum that his MBA and expensive suit couldn't fill. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I was escorted from the building, my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Alan Croft, sent the first volley. A registered letter was delivered to Arthur Caldwell's office. It was a formal cease and desist. It stated, in unambiguous legal terms, that Aerodyne Industries was actively infringing on 3 federally registered patents owned by Mr. Mark Bennett. It listed the patent numbers and cited the specific sections of the Project Chimera proposal that were in direct violation. It demanded an immediate halt to all development and presentation of the infringing technology. Simultaneously, Allen sent a second, carefully worded letter to the Department of Defense's procurement office for the Aegis contract. It was not an accusation, but a notification. It informed them that a critical intellectual property dispute had arisen concerning the technology proposed by Aerodyne, and that the ownership of the core IP was not, in fact, held by the bidding company. The DoD does not tolerate 2 things: delays and IP ambiguity. A billion-dollar contract for a critical defense system could not have even a shadow of a doubt about who owned the technology. The government would not risk being sued for infringement down the line. The response was swift. By Tuesday afternoon, Allen received a call from Aerodyne's general counsel. Their tone was no longer dismissive. It was panicked. An emergency board meeting was called for Wednesday at 10 a.m. My presence was urgently requested. I chose my clothes for that meeting with care. Not a suit. That wasn't me. I wore the same thing I always wore to the office: simple slacks, a comfortable button-down shirt, and the same worn leather blazer. I wanted them to see the same man they had fired. I wanted them to understand that nothing about me had changed. Only their perception of my power had. The boardroom was a tomb. The air was thick with tension. Caldwell was at the head of the table, his face pale and tight. Tristan was next to him, but the smirk was gone. It had been replaced by a pinched, resentful glare. 3 company lawyers, men I had never seen before, sat opposite them, surrounded by stacks of files. They looked like they hadn't slept. Allen and I sat down. The silence stretched. Finally, Caldwell spoke, his voice strained. "Mark, I think there has been a serious misunderstanding." Allen placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with a precise click. "There is no misunderstanding, Arthur," he said, his voice calm and cold. "Your company, under the guidance of Mr. Vance, has willfully misappropriated my client's intellectual property. You have incorporated it into a commercial bid valued at over $1 billion and presented it as your own. That is not a misunderstanding. That is theft." Tristan scoffed. "That's ridiculous. The concepts for Chimera were developed internally. Mark's work for the company is company property. It's standard work for hire." "You're referring to the shop-right doctrine, Mr. Vance," Allen replied, without looking at him, his focus entirely on Caldwell. "And you would be correct if the patents were developed on company time. using company resources. However, they were not. We have meticulous records. The patent applications were funded personally by Mr. Bennett. The primary development work was conducted on his personal time, using his own equipment. Aerodyne was granted an implicit, non-exclusive license to use this technology during Mr. Bennett's tenure. Your termination of his employment also terminated that license, effective 4:17 p.m. last Monday. One of the company lawyers cleared his throat. This is highly irregular, Mr. Croft. We'll have to verify these claims. Please do, Allen said, sliding a thick binder across the table. It landed in front of Caldwell with a solid, definitive thud. That is a copy of Mr. Bennett's documentation. Patent certificates, dated correspondence with the patent office, notarized, entries from his engineering notebooks predating your Project Chimera by several years. You will also find a side-by-side technical analysis comparing the claims in his patents to the specifications in your proposal. The overlap is 100%. Caldwell opened the binder. His face went from pale to ashen as he flipped through the pages. He saw the truth. He saw the checkmate. He looked up at me, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. Mark, what do you want? He asked. We can work something out. A licensing fee. A generous one. We can reinstate you with a raise. This was the moment they thought money could solve it. The moment they still believed they were in control. I leaned forward slightly. I looked past Caldwell, past the lawyers, and locked eyes with Tristan Vance. I do not accept, I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the silent room. Your authority here, your ability to offer me anything, is based on the assumption that Aerodyne holds the keys to the Aegis contract. You don't. I do. Allen took his cue. As of this morning, he announced, we have been in communication with the Department of Defense. Given the undeniable IP contamination of Aerodyne's bid, they are concerned. They require a clean chain of title for the technology, a chain you can no longer provide. Tristan finally snapped. This is extortion. He's trying to sabotage the company. Your company is in violation of federal patent law, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice cutting through his outburst. My patents, my property. The technology you call Chimera is a direct and willful infringement. As the sole owner of that IP, I am exercising my right to rescind any and all licenses for its use. You can't sell what you don't own. The DoD understands that, even if you don't. The finality of my statement hung in the air. The lawyers whispered frantically to each other. Caldwell stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. He had built his strategy around a stolen jewel, and the original owner had just walked into the room to take it back. The game was over. All that was left was to dictate the terms of their surrender, and my terms were not going to be gentle. My client is not interested in a licensing deal, Allen stated, his voice like chipping ice. A partnership with a company that has acted in such bad faith is untenable. We are also not interested in litigation, though make no mistake, we would win, and the resulting statutory damages for willful infringement would be catastrophic for your quarterly earnings. He paused, letting the threat settle. We have an alternative proposal, a cleaner path forward for everyone. I had spent the weekend not just compiling evidence, but making calls. I reached out to a smaller, more agile aerospace firm, a company called Vanguard Dynamics, run by a couple of engineers I respected who had left Aerodyne years ago. I presented them with the situation and a proposition. I would bring the IP, they would provide the manufacturing and logistical support. We would form a joint venture to service the Aegis contract. Allen laid it out for the board. Mr. Bennett has formed a new entity, Bennett Innovative Systems, LLC. He is prepared to offer the Department of Defense a new, unencumbered bid for the Aegis contract through a partnership with Vanguard Dynamics. He will license his patents exclusively to this new venture. The DoD gets the technology they want, from the man who actually created it, with a clean chain of title. Caldwell looked like he had been punched. You can't do that. You can't just take the contract. I'm not taking it, Arthur, I said, finally using his first name. I'm simply presenting the government with a viable option. The option of working with the inventor instead of the thieves. Given your company's current legal complications, which option do you think they will choose? The choice was obvious. The DoD would jump at the chance to avoid a protracted legal battle and partner directly with the source of the innovation. Aerodyne's bid was dead. They had nothing to offer but a lawsuit magnet. Our proposal is this, Allen continued, closing his briefcase. Aerodyne will formally withdraw its bid for the Aegis contract, citing unresolved internal IP conflicts. You will release Mr. Bennett from his non-disclosure agreement. In return, Mr. Bennett will sign a covenant not to sue Aerodyne for the initial patent infringement. He gets a clean break, and you avoid a public spectacle and a legal judgment that would cripple your company. This is a one-time offer. You have 24 hours to accept. We stood up to leave. As I reached the door, I turned back. Tristan was staring at me, his face a mask of impotent rage. His entire career was built on PowerPoints and taking credit for other people's work. He had finally run into something real, something he couldn't talk his way around. By the way, Tristan, I said, it's not a paradigm shift. It's a series of cascading logic gates and a predictive algorithm. You might want to learn the difference. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The next day, Aerodyne's lawyers sent over the signed agreements. The company's stock fell 28% in a single day after they announced the withdrawal of their bid for the Aegis contract. The market capitalization loss was just over $840 million, a financial bloodbath. Arthur Caldwell was forced into an early retirement by the board of directors 2 weeks later. His golden parachute was reportedly cut in half due to the fiasco. I read he was now living in a smaller house in a less prestigious zip code. Tristan Vance was fired for cause. The official reason was gross mismanagement leading to significant financial and reputational damage. His name was poison in the defense industry. The last I heard, he was a regional sales manager for a luxury car dealership in Scottsdale. I imagine he still talks a lot about synergy. The poetic justice was exquisite. Industry journals wrote articles about the Aerodyne implosion. They used words like disruption to describe how a legacy company was upended. They talked about the paradigm shift needed in corporate culture to value and protect institutional knowledge. The buzzwords Tristan had used as weapons were now carved on his professional tombstone. My new life began. Bennett Innovative Systems, in partnership with Vanguard Dynamics, was officially awarded the Aegis contract. The total value was $1.2 billion over 10 years. My personal stake was substantial. The first check I received for the IP licensing rights was for $7,500,000. I paid off my mortgage, set up college funds for my grandchildren, and took Susan to Italy, just like I had promised her 20 years ago. We spent a month there. I didn't check my email once. I am my own boss now. I work when I want, on the problems I find interesting. I hired Dave from Aerodyne and a few other good engineers who were tired of the corporate nonsense. We have a small office, but the work is cutting edge. We're developing new systems, and every single one of them is being patented under the names of the engineers who create them. It's a core company policy. The real victory isn't the money, though that provides a freedom I've never known. It's the peace. It's attending my granddaughter's afternoon ballet recital without having to check my phone. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my life's work is finally and truly my own. It's the knowledge that competence, patience, and a well-placed legal document are the most effective weapons against arrogance and greed. Patience is a weapon. Credentials on a wall are just paper. True value lies in what you can build, and more importantly, in what you can prove you own. They mistook my silence for weakness, but it was just the quiet hum of a plan coming together. They thought it was just business. And in the end, I showed them I was better at business than they were. Thanks for watching. If you have a story about competence winning the day, I'd like to read about it in the comments below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next video.